Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Leadership Void podcast. I'm Enrique with my co-host Vince to bring you the best in our veteran military spouse and first responder community. And Vince will introduce today's guest.
Yes, thanks, Enrique. Happy October, everyone. All the way from Lanesville, Indiana, folks. We have Dr. Erin Mires. She is the CEO and founder of Evolve, the Leadership Evolution. Woo! We're so excited to have her in the show. Erin, let's start off. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Vince. I appreciate that. And Enrique, thank you so much for having me. So, a little bit about me. I'm an Air Force veteran. So, served on active duty. I'm also an Air Force spouse. So, my husband and I met during our time in the Air Force, and he continues to serve in a reserve capacity now. And I am also a mother of three young, beautiful children. They are 5, 4, and 2. And I am a professor and also, as you said, the CEO and founder of Evolve, the Leadership Evolution. I have a PhD in organizational development and leadership. So basically what I did is I took what I knew from my leadership capacity in the Air Force, combined it with my academic experience, and then a little bit of my personal story that we can get into in a moment as well. And it just created a business around that experience because I felt that there was a void in leadership development in the civilian world. You know, we get so much of it in military, first responders, etc. And then you go out into the civilian world, you're like, where's all my professional development? You know what I mean? You're not going to send me to a course this year.
A wonderful way to take everything that you had and put it in a package that both serves you as a professional, your family, and the community. So I'm very happy to hear that you did that, and the void, right? It's a leadership
The
void
void, exactly.
podcast, right? But wonderful. So tell us a little bit more about Evolve.
So I kind of became an accidental founder of this leadership development focused company. So I was a professor at a local university here, and I loved it. It was all about working professionals. You had to have a minimum of 5 years of work experience to even get accepted into the program. So there was very military first responder focused because with a lot of those people, get into a career first and then come back later for a degree. And so I loved the population, loved what I was doing, loved my coworkers, loved the organizational leadership program itself, became the program director. And then it was January 2020. I gave birth to my third child at the end of January 2020, took the minimum of 6-week maternity leave, or should I say maximum of 6-week maternity leave, paid maternity leave, and came back to work. Was back to work for about 5 days and got sent home for COVID. So we were 80% online program anyway, so that transition was okay. What really began to affect and impact me during mid 2020 was when daycare shut down. My husband is now a cargo pilot, so he was shipping PPE all over the world in COVID response, flew more during that time period than he even had deployed in the United States Air Force. And so he was gone. Daycare shut down. I had a 3-year-old, an 18-month-old, and a newborn on my lap, trying to run a 500-plus student program, working 50-plus hours a week with these 3 young kids on my lap, and I mentally broke. Being a veteran, trying to be a woman in a very, in a military community, have this strong mindset, try to stand up for myself, I felt like such a failure. And I ended up having panic attacks, feeling like I was failing my spouse, my children, my students, my coworkers, just felt like a failure for the first time in really my whole life. And I really struggled with that. So I ended up picking up the phone with tears in my eyes and I called the VA. I'm so thankful to have the Veterans Affairs, provide those types of services, the mental health services that they do. But I picked up the phone and was ultimately diagnosed with severe postpartum anxiety and moderate postpartum depression. And that impacted me so much to realize that I hadn't been putting the values that I needed to put first, that I hadn't been recognizing this downfall in myself. I thought I had just had, a touch of baby blues or, whatever, when really it was this whole mental health journey and I hadn't been capable of seeing the signs. And so I took that concept because I ended up ultimately leaving my full-time professor gig at the university so I could take care of myself and my family and realign my values. But then let's be honest, a 3-year-old, a 20-month-old, and a 2-month-old by that time were not intellectually stimulating enough for me. I love them dearly, but they don't kind of give me that same type of mindset. And so I continued with some consulting opportunities that gave me the flexibility to be intellectually stimulated and be at home with my children as daycares were on again, off again during COVID. And I took my story, my personal story, and I added it to these models and theories of leadership, these leadership development principles. And by adding in those components, these mental health components, this kind of holistic leadership concept, people really began to resonate with it. Because during COVID, a lot of us ended up going through some mental issues, some mental health concerns, a mental health journey. And so people really resonated with this concept of holistic leadership. How do I address the fact that you're a mother of 3 young children, still drive the bottom line of the organization, help support you, help support the organization, help you be the best person possible in the organization? And so that's kind of where Evolve the Leadership Evolution came from, was this redefining of leadership to make sure that this concept of holistic leadership is created. So, taking everything I learned plus this mental health journey and really integrating the two.
I love that story. I love your journey. And you share the fact that we're just human, right? And we all have feelings and emotions. And I love the fact that you named it Evolve, because that's what you did. It was an evolution that you had, Erin. And I definitely authentic. You were intentional. And it's all about your self-care. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for putting this on, either though you stumbled on it, but it was worthwhile through your journey. It was already in the cards, as they say. So I appreciate hearing all that. Now, through the pandemic, post-pandemic, any lessons learned that had influenced or impacted your company as it came about?
Oh, absolutely. So I just kind of talked about the negative impact that the pandemic had, but there's so much positive impact. And it's this idea of kind of capitalizing on this holistic leadership. So, what the pandemic did for many of us is we had to work from home, but that home provided us a window into aspects of previously see. So we're suddenly in this together, and you can see the paintings I have hanging on my wall. You can hear the kids crying in the background, the dogs bark, the cats running across keyboards, and all these insights into people's lives that we previously may not have connected on. And so kind of seeing everybody in their home environment, then it isolated in this, I kind of like to call it this capsule, right? People think of organizations as not being subsectors of society. They're like this vacuum, this capsule that's separate from society, and you have to show up as the specific person there. And what the pandemic did is it brought us out of that vacuum. It opened that seal and gave us insight into people's lives. And as we transition to this post-pandemic world, we have to take that into account. We know more about each other than we ever have, and there's so much positive that comes from that. I now know certain things about you that can help me lead you better, that can help me manage you better, that can help me understand you better. Understand, if you show up and are having a bad day, what may be the cause of that? How can we support you to get through that so that you can be productive again tomorrow or next week or next month? So lots of lessons learned that have really positively impacted that we really try to incorporate in all of our leadership lessons and opportunities.
You're so right, because one of the positives that did come out of that whole period was the fact that everyone was going through similar things at the same time. So before, it used to be our co-workers or those that we led were going through a period on their own, and so we were not connected. And so as leaders, probably you didn't feel like you could understand, but now everyone has a baseline where they could say, oh yeah, I know how that feels, or I know how that looks, and has undoubtedly made some people, because not everybody learns, some people are more empathetic and encouraging to their workforce. So, you shared a lot of the obstacles and a lot of the great things that have come out. So, what's on the horizon for Evolve?
Just making sure that we help organizations and individuals transition to this post-pandemic world. Right now, there's a lot of push, and there probably is in your part of the country as well, but around here, a huge push to go back to work. And we're seeing a lot of pushback, a lot of disengagement, a lot of people saying, I'm not going to do that. And that's part of, the push of the great resignation, as people are calling it, and this quiet quitting and all of that. A lot of that stems from the fact that no, we've seen a better way. And how do we really begin to help organizations understand that there may be opportunity for flexibility? Yes. Could there be a hit on engagement here because you're not having people back in the workplace? Yeah, but there could be a rise in engagement here by not having people back in the workplace. So how does that balance? How do we create the policies and the procedures to support what people want and need in this post-pandemic era? And so that's the big push right now for Evolve the Leadership Evolution. What's on the horizon is continuing to provide programming and consulting and coaching opportunities that help support that.
That is amazing. The hows, right? The listening to understand what they need to definitely influence them to become part of the workforce again, because we need people to work, right? And they need to be
people.
happy.
Exactly. We need people to re-enter the workforce, but we need to support them in the way that they expect that now, because there's been so much transition. And I love that you said the word influence, because that's one of the big things that we're working with a lot of people is, how do you successfully influence people? Not manipulate them, influence them to change. And a lot of that comes with value alignment. And it is diving in and gathering that data to figure out, where are my values aligned with yours, and how can we find that intersect that can really make us successful together.
Absolutely. Talk about influence. So now let's talk about leadership. How do you influence yourself here, right? So
Yes.
obviously in your spare time, I'm like, she has a PhD in organization development, 3 kids, a family, and she juggles some multiple balls. But what do you do to aid you to strive in your professional life as far as influencing some of those accolades and some of those professional wisdoms that you share yourself?
The big thing for me is just continued learning. And I'm not talking about textbook learning. I rarely pick up a textbook anymore, right? I mean, I got my PhD, I have that part done with me. But the big thing that's so important for me is understanding the impacts of society. I already kind of talked about how organizations tend to act as though they're a vacuum and they're not impacted by society, when in fact, and I wrote my entire PhD dissertation on this, organizations are a subsector of society. What happens in society impacts and influences what happens within an organization, and you can't pretend that it doesn't. And so the major social movements that have been happening right now need to be reflected within organizations. And so for me, it's all about diving into the social impacts that are going on in this country, around the world, that are impacting and influencing everybody when it comes to leadership. How do we change and adjust our leadership to help support some of the social movements that are bringing us forward in our culture?
So powerful to see that influence in corporate America or in organizations, whatever that may be. You're right. Folks have been able to say, "Oh, that's out there. That's not here." And and anything that this pandemic era has taught us, that as organizations, no, it's out there and it's in here. And so it's a great realization for them to be able to help. There's so much advice that all three of us have been able to give throughout the years as leaders, or those that are in charge of leadership development. But what advice did you get that stuck with you, and you said, well, that's a golden ticket type of advice I'm going to have with me throughout my life, that you would like to share with the audience today?
I have a couple of things that I want to say. Number one was the one that I kind of prepared in anticipation for this question. But then as we've been talking, I have another piece of advice that I actually learned from a student that I'd like to share as well, if you're open to me sharing two little bits. Number one is, it's okay to not be okay, It's so frequently in our society, we suppress our emotions, we suppress what we're doing, we have a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to, hey, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm great, thanks, fine. And I'm really not okay. Right? It's okay for us as leaders to say, but how are you really feeling? And for people to respond with, you know what? I had a crappy morning. Like, great. Let's talk about it. Are you open to talking about it? Do you want to talk about it? And that allows for the building of emotional intelligence that can really be so helpful and impactful in an organization. And that would be an entire other podcast to dive into the emotional intelligence side. But when we were talking about kind of my second piece of advice, when we were discussing, society and the societal impacts on organizations, I had a student once tell me, she said, Dr. Mires, you are the first professor that I have ever had, and this was back in 2019, that I have ever had that is okay with talking about the Black Lives Matter movement in the classroom. She's like, first person that has ever brought it up and been okay with it. She's like, I thank you for that. And so I think the other thing that when it comes to societal impact on organizations, we have to be okay with talking about it and okay with being wrong about some things and saying, you know what, I don't know anything about that. Tell me about it. Or when someone says, actually, what you said was a little offensive. Okay, great. Thank you so much for bringing that. I mean, not great, but thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Tell me more about how and why. Allow me to learn and have the opportunity to learn. And so that was a really big lesson that I got from my student was, gosh, people do not talk about this enough. They don't openly talk about it enough. Let's talk about it. And then the flip side of that, make sure that we're asking people if they're really truly okay, especially as leaders.
Absolutely. You talk about vulnerability, you talk about being courageous, right? And those two go hand in hand. And then you give them the safe space, as you did with the Black Lives Matter issue, and or individuals just in your classroom to be open to talk, or your employees or your team members. So definitely important attributes. Great advice to emerging leaders. Be authentic, be vulnerable, have the courage, and create that safe space. I love it. So, Erin, what more memorable leadership moments or aha moments have you encountered that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think the most memorable leadership or aha moments for me was admitting mistakes. So there's a great story about I live in bourbon country. So Lanesville, Indiana, you introduced me from there. I'm right outside of Louisville, Kentucky. So it's bourbon country. And one of the biggest leadership aha moments that I've had actually happened on a bourbon tour. And I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, a little oxymoronic, but it really did. I've done all this consulting work with people. I learned a lot from leaders, and yet somehow this bourbon tour sticks out in my mind. So as we were going through the bourbon tour, it was one of those bourbon distilleries where it's very old fashioned in terms of how they have kept a lot of their bourbon created in, wooden vats, etc. And so they talked about how there was one employee who got the chemical composition wrong on the mix of the bourbon. So as it was distilling, it went off. And so they have, these vats are gigantic. They're, 2 stories high, huge, massive things. And so that's a lot of bourbon that could have been created from that. And they got it wrong. They put just, the wrong ingredient or the wrong combination, something. I don't know the exact details behind it, but something was wrong. And the tour guide, he said, one of the things that stuck out to me most about that experience was that our leaders did not fire that person, even though they ruined probably thousands upon thousands of dollars, 6 figures worth of bourbon, maybe even more, maybe $1 million worth of bourbon that, were profit loss. We had to start all over on this distillery process. But instead of firing this individual, they put them in quality assurance because that person is never going to make that mistake again. They know the impact on the company. And they know now that the leaders trust them to make mistakes and to learn from them. And they put them in a place where they could teach and influence others and impact others to not make similar mistakes. And I just loved that. So I could give you a personal experience, but for me, that one stands out the most. Learn, allow people to make mistakes, to learn from it. It creates innovation, it creates opportunity, it creates the opportunity to bring productivity forward and drive the bottom line.
Yeah, that's powerful because typically QA, QA is making sure that an error doesn't occur. This person now brings experience as to what happens when an error occurs, right? And it's almost double down on making sure that it doesn't. And so a wise choice for that distillery, a wise choice to put somebody with experience on both sides, the prevention and the recovery, right? Because it's there one prevents the cost, one makes sure that it doesn't happen again. So great share there. Now, as we progress in our leadership journeys, as we progress in our self-development, there are times that come uh, change, right, and challenge. We've seen plenty of that throughout our life, but really the last 3 years have been like intensive change and challenge moments. So, what strategies have you implemented or you would like to share that has facilitated success for you in terms of change and challenges?
It's a great question, Enrique. And for me, the biggest thing that we have done is we've incorporated a lot of personality assessments. And which seems funny because change can be so soft and qualitative. To add in a quantitative component to it almost seems counterintuitive, but we actually feel that it really helps balance it out. So when we incorporate a lot of personality assessments, the behavioral ones in particular can change and adjust over the course of several years or major life events. So we tell people you need to retake your personality assessments every 3 years or during major life events, COVID being one of them. So if you have not taken your personality assessments since COVID, you need to take them again. And so what we do with those personality assessments is we say, hey, let's dive in and let's build our emotional intelligence here a little bit. How do you act under stress? Those personality assessments can tell us that. How do you interact with others during times of stress? How do you interact with others when you are in your area of growth, when you're hitting your stride, when you're being your most productive? And by understanding that, we're better able to call each other out and support each other when we start to notice stress coming into people's lives. And so there's constant change that's occurring, and there's constant shifts that need to happen both internal to the organization as well as, outside the organization. And by better understanding ourselves and by better understanding our team members, we're better able to support each other, to support ourselves, to call each other out on certain things and say, you know what, you may just need a break for a little bit, or you know what, this change is affecting you a little bit. Let us help pull together and support you. So that's the number one strategy that I would recommend to any teams dealing with change and challenges. Build up the emotional intelligence, add in some additional quantitative resources through personality assessments.
Fabulous words of wisdom by Dr. Erin Mires, folks. If you haven't heard it, you've done an assessment recently, great. But if you haven't, it's time, because guess what? We all have changed and we have a new baseline based on COVID. So please go to Evolve or Dr. Mires to find out how to get a hold of this great opportunity you have. But folks, how do you get a hold of Dr. Erin? Let's find out right now. How do they do that? How they call you, email you, your Evolve, your company? They are interested. I know they are, because I am.
Well, thank you, Vince. So most of our social media presence is on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Erin Mires, PhD, on LinkedIn, or Evolve the Leadership Evolution on LinkedIn. But we also have an app. That's where we've built a community of evolutionary leaders. So you can find us in Google Play or the Apple App Store. It's the Leadership Evolution. You can just search for it, download it right there. And you can email us anytime at hello@evolve.vision. That's HELLO at EVOLVE.VISION. Yes, there's no .com, there's no .org, there's no .net. It's just evolve.vision.
You can't get any clearer than that, folks. And we're going to make sure to have all of that as part of the show notes and a video so you can get a hold of Dr. Erin or Evolve. And if you'd like to get a hold of us, theleadershipvoid@gmail.com is where you will send that correspondence. If you like a leadership topic covered or a guest that you would like to see appear on our podcast, please do so that way. Now, folks, don't forget, on the 1st and the 15th of every month, we provide Radio Check, which is a LinkedIn Live event at 7 p.m. Eastern, 1900 for those that are military inclined, and where we open up the platform for folks. And Dr. Erin had mentioned earlier, it's okay not to be okay, right? And that's an avenue we provide where folks can actually come in, get in the chat, make some comments. We'll have some discussions around those things, but we would love to have you. And next week, we'll have another dynamic leader doing great things in and for the community. But today, Dr. Erin Mires, thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. You definitely filled the void in leadership today. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Vince and Enrique. I really appreciate it. You're doing amazing things, and thank you for supporting our community.